The 1950s. That was when the streets in Europe's cities started to change from being local and shared spaces to increasingly being corridors for cars. That was over 70 years ago, a long time to be in one system, but today we again see change. There's a lot of fresh ideas. We see increasing biking pathways, car-free zones, and so on, but change remains slow. So today we want to ask, what contribution can research and innovation make to accelerate progress? And with that, welcome to episode 39 of the Urban Lunch Talk series, hosted by JPI Urban Europe on the topic of can urban experiments breach the car dominance in cities? My name is Jakob Schabos. I work for IQ Samhällsbyggnad, the Swedish Center for Innovation and Quality in the Built Environment. And I have the great pleasure of moderating this webinar. In this episode, we will look at the potential of research and innovation projects. And we want to ask how we can go from incremental to transformational steps. And I'm thrilled to have an incredibly knowledgeable panel on the subject. So here with us today, we have Göran Smith. Göran is the director of the Mobility and Transformation Unit at RISE. And he was one of the experts in the JPI Urban Europe Knowledge Hub. We also have Annick Hummels. She is professor of socio-historical technology studies at the University of Maastricht. And she is also the project leader in the project, the JPI project Embedding Labs. We have Imre Kesharu. He's associate professor of urban mobility at the Free University of Brussels, and also coordinator of the JPI Street Forum project. And finally, last but not least, we have Florian Lorenz. Florian is landscape architect, process designer, and co-founder of Studio Laut. And he's also involved in the JPI Tune Our Block project. A warm welcome to all of you. And before we begin, I would also like to encourage all of you to use the chat, as I can already see that you do. And please feel most encouraged to ask questions you may have to our panelists. We will do our very best to pick them up later on in the session. I also want to highlight that we are recording the session and that we will later on publish it on our YouTube channel. So before we jump into the discussion, I would like to give each of our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves. And if you could do that also by describing a bit how you are working in connection to today's topic, and be it working with labs, with experiments, or with any sort of toolkits, outputs around car dominance. So Imre, I think you have been involved, if I remember correctly, in 7 JPI and DOT projects. Maybe you could directly kick us off with an introduction.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here today. I'm based in Brussels, and indeed we are currently coordinator of the Street Forum project, which is soon coming to its end. And in the Street Forum project, we've been working on transforming streets into accessible urban oases by developing analog and digital tools to support consensus building. So we've been looking at a specific aspect of street experiments and street interventions, how to build consensus among the diverse stakeholders, and how to find actually what problems need to be addressed in the streets, but also what solutions could be found which are supported by at least most of the stakeholders. So we are developing currently the Street Forum toolkit that will consist of analog and digital tools to engage local residents, but also other stakeholders like businesses, public authorities, into the conversation about issues, solutions, but also building trust among them. And we have been testing these tools in 4 living labs in Istanbul, Brussels, Stockholm, and also in Vienna. And we are synthesizing now the finding to make this valuable for the whole community. So that's us in a nutshell.
Excellent. And trust building is definitely something that I want to pick up on later on. Then Florian, you have worked a lot with applied research and complex urban transformations. Could you tell us a little bit more about your work?
Yeah, thank you very much for having us today. We are a small consultancy in Vienna. LOUD stands for Landscape Architecture and Urban Transformation. And I'm here today because we are part of the consortium, or have been part of the consortium from the Tune Our Block project. Tune Our Block stands for Transforming Urban Quarters to Human Scale Environments, applying superblock concepts for different urban structures. And we worked until mid last year on looking at a superblock concept as a strategy for running complex urban transformation processes. We have been a consortium of partners from Germany, Austria, and Slovenia. And in this sense, we have done several experiments because the concept of superblocks is or followed also several experiments because the concept of superblocks is in almost all the cities where it's applied. It's something new, so per definition, this is somewhat an experiment that cities are doing at various scales, and we have studied those processes and also run our own small scale experiments to involve different stakeholders in the process. Yeah, and in our practice, we also work with bringing innovation on the ground. So in this sense, we're also testing hypotheses. We're learning from how we are doing things. And in this sense, I guess we do experimental work, although we would hardly call it experiments when we do work. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Next up, Anik, you work with urban transformations and the difficulties that come with it. Could you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, thank you. I have a background in science, technology, and society studies, and I try to apply insights from that field about technological developments and innovation to the city. Basically, that's what I am doing. And in my previous work, I was interested in the notion of urban obduracy, which means resistance to change. So the question, why can it be so difficult to transform cities? Once all these infrastructures and structures are in place and have grown historically, it can be very hard to change them. So that those insights I also apply in the project that I'm representing here, Embedding Labs, that is coordinated by Maastricht University, but also involves universities in Sweden and Poland. This project is concerned with the question, why do these urban experiments that often seem to be locally successful, why don't they have a broader impact? Why does the impact often end with the experiment itself without the possibility or that we see that they also have a broader impact on policy making, for instance? So that's the question that we started from, and we did experiments in 3 cities, in Maastricht, in Stockholm, and in Gdansk in Poland. And we can come to talk a little bit more about it. The project will finish this summer, so we are very excited to now wrap up everything and share our results.
Excellent. And how experiments can have an impact. I'm going to return to that in a moment. But before that, we have last but not least, Göran Smith. Your research is, amongst other things, focused on how we can address barriers to radical transformations in mobility. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, everyone. So my name is Göran or Göran. I direct the research unit at RISE Research Institutes of Sweden, in Sweden. And when Anik presented herself, it seems like we're doing kind of the same thing, but focused mostly on mobility, but not only focusing on cities. So we try to identify and address institutional barriers for radical transformations in mobility, and we have a few different focuses. We call them active and shared mobility, policy lab and regulatory innovation, and behavior change modeling. And in all those 3 themes within them. We work with experiments in that we conduct them ourselves. We research them and we study the impacts of them. And today I'm here because, or I guess that's why I'm invited, because I was part of the acute accessibility and connectivity knowledge hub for urban transformation in Europe project, where the project as a whole tried to create a hub for overcoming fragmentation of findings and experiences between the projects in that portfolio, and create a space for stakeholder exchange. But the part I was involved in that, we try to develop a research synthesis focusing on the transformative capacity of the projects. And I can speak more about that later.
Great. Looking forward to that. Now, I'd like to start us off by creating a bit of a knowledge foundation. Now, we've already talked a bit about experiments, and I know you work with that to different extents, but I do wonder, the term experiment really reminds me of my chemistry classes in school. So is there sort of a definition, an accepted understanding of this is experiments, what we talk about in the urban context, or free components that need to be met? Maybe Göran, I can pass that one to you.
So the simple answer to that question is no. And I come at this from the sustainability transitions research community, and within that, which works with the both among scholars, but among policymakers, there are a lot of different understandings. The concept is widely used by both scholars and policymakers, but it is quite inconsistent in how it's used and what it's meant. There are disagreements on what types of novelty should be included, how structured should the tests and the measurements be, and what mostly what are the actual objectives of the experiments. And there is also tension, and I guess Anik can speak more about that, between what is meant to be done and then what is done in practice. But there have been a few different researchers trying to look at all the different ways it's understood and produce these overarching definitions. And one I tend to use, because I guess because I agree with it, is by a researcher called Franz Senger and colleagues. And I will read it out to you. An experiment is an inclusive, practice-based and challenge-led initiative, which is designed to promote system innovation through social learning under conditions of uncertainty and ambiguity. A lot of concepts in that. I guess any of the other speakers, you might have the different interpretations too.
Yeah. Now, if we do focus on, or if we think about potential on the one side and perhaps limitations and risks on the other side, where are we there? What impacts can experiments have, perhaps directly in the experiences that you have all made? Yeah, Anik, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about this notion of how experiments or challenges, I think we also use that term in our project, setting up a challenge to destabilize kind of a current way of doing things, or a current system, you could say. So this destabilization is, I think, a very interesting aspect of these experiments. And we organized in Embedding Labs a challenge for university employees to try to seduce them to leave their car, at home, and to come to their work by a bicycle or public transport. So this was also really trying to destabilize a habit or a daily routine of people. But also we try to destabilize the system of how people get remuneration for their travel costs by the university. So it also involved a kind of administrative change, so to say. And then thirdly, we also try to destabilize how the university work with their space. Like it's a large employer in the inner city, so they have a lot of ground area space that they can use for parking lots, but also for other purposes. So what if we can destabilize this way of using space and transform parking spaces into bicycle sheds, for instance? So I think those are a few examples of how we, in our challenge, try to destabilize aspects of that system, not maybe the whole system in one go, but at least a few crucial parts of it.
Excellent. Göran, please.
Yes, and if I can, based on this very brief understanding I now have of Anik's experiment, I think that firstly, I think it's great and it's quite uncommon to address destabilization within experiments. I think that's a great point, and it should be done a lot more. But if you look at that example and you asked Jacob about opportunities and limitations, I think one great opportunity that they had there was that they could change a lot of circumstances that would have been quite difficult to do if you went from not having them to deciding to have them continuously. So that's one of the opportunities that you have with experiments, that you can change things temporarily that would have been very difficult to change otherwise, and through that you can change the circumstances. But the limitations is then, of course, that it's bounded by time, and for instance, changing travel habits, that takes a lot of time to do that. And then secondly, that there are a lot of structures and in the wider socio-technical system that Anik and colleagues couldn't change. For instance, all the hidden subsidies and of car use and the norms around it, and that of course limits the possibilities of what impacts an experiment can have.
Excellent. Imre, please.
Maybe I think it's also interesting the type of words that we use to describe experiment: destabilization, risk, quick transformation, experimentation. But if I think back of the conversations that we had with our stakeholders in our living labs, which includes public authorities, NGOs, but simply citizens who live there. These are the very words that actually they would like to avoid in their lives. So it's very interesting, I think, to how we phrase and how we introduce these terms into our conversations with the stakeholders, because what they are looking for is usually security, safety, preserving their habits. On the other hand, of course, they also want some sort of transformation. So what we have seen that sometimes there is a sort of a conflict between doing something very quickly or in an experimental way with a very uncertain outcome, but also getting all the stakeholders on board. And this is especially the case with the public authorities who actually, or which really are trying to avoid risks, but many times also with local residents and citizens, because we don't only want those on board who are always innovative, highly educated, or possibly affluent, but we would like to involve a broader range of the community. So I see here a possible conflict in the narratives.
It definitely sounds like a conflict. I mean, maybe even on the general term that we want quick, large-scale transformation, and I'm sure, Imre, the participatory processes that you have really worked with, that is maybe not very easy to bring together. Florian, please.
Yeah, thank you. I can totally second what Imre just said about the wording experiment. I think it's in the farther you go into the academic realm, the more likely it is used, or the less reservations you have to using it, and the more you go towards a sort of I don't know, let's say like implementation responsible stakeholders. They tend to avoid that the word experiment, because it basically, if you're responsible for spending, I don't know, public money or private money, you are like, okay, we spend now, I don't know, millions of euro on an experiment. That just doesn't sound really good. So the experimentation, I mean, we're all doing experimentation all the time and learning from it. I think it's just interesting to go there and say like, yeah, we need experiments because we need to change the regime or the sort of how our system is set up, our socio-technological regime that we're living in and under. One thing that I maybe just in terms of perspective, because that's often said, but it's also an argument that we can use when we try to convince stakeholders or funders about the importance of experiments, is maybe just thinking about it. We as a global society are currently running a huge experiment because we are trying to overshoot basically our carrying capacity of the planet with the way we use resources, with the way we organize our society, especially the highly consumptive and industrialized society we in Europe, for example, are part of. And so in this sense, we don't really know what the outcome is, but this is sort of like the very broad context for everything. Yeah, so that was just a food for thought, and maybe also a little bit of a hint towards the maybe we can discuss a little bit about those regimes, which I think is quite interesting. I think Göran, you wanted to tell us something about those.
I can do that, but mostly now I would like to build on what you said, Florian, and also what Imre said, and I think there is a clash in the language and what different stakeholders make of it, not only between academia and practice, but also between the public and the private sector, because that I've seen quite many times that innovators from the private sector speak about the huge transformation that let's say an innovation that is to be experimented with it could have, and how that could produce shock the system and produce all these different new revenues and etc. And to them and to investors that sounds great, but for a public sector official that has to provide stability and lower risk, that might not sound as attractive.
Excellent. Annick, please.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see indeed how this whole notion of experiment has a very different reception with the different stakeholders that we work with. But of course, one of the key ideas behind these experiments and urban living labs is that it's about co-creation and about learning together. And I wanted to respond also to what Florian said about learning from those experiments. That's really important. Also, I think if you want to gain impact with the lessons learned in these experiments, the whole learning trajectory is becoming very crucial. And I think that's also one of the things in our project, that we try to make this whole learning trajectory and also with whom you learn. So setting up a learning community, define your learning goals or your learning questions beforehand together to really try and align that between these different stakeholders. So that it's also clear what the experiment is about and what the stakes involved are and who is interested in which aspects of what it should deliver. And I think that also in the end, like harvesting explicitly what has been learned through and by the different stakeholders, that is, I think, the way that we propose you can also gain more impact from these experiments. So this is also, I think, within the experiments themselves, a crucial aspect of it, to find this kind of community of learning and also agreement on what the experiment is about.
Super. Imre, please.
I think, Annick, you raised a very important aspect of experiments and living labs in general. So learning in our living labs as well, and actually the tools that we have been developing in Street Forum, the aim is that stakeholders and especially citizens can learn about even their neighbors. What do they need actually? Why is there a problem in the neighborhood? Why do we need an intervention or an experiment? So that's usually the very first step. But actually, we even start with not even talking about experiments or not even problems, but we try to bring people together around like a street kitchen and get them to talk about their lives, to understand actually how they live in that specific neighborhood. And through these conversations, actually, we learn and they learn from each other what specific issues arise in their lives, why they actually need a car that needs to be parked in their front door, for example. So we shouldn't treat it as a taboo or look negatively at people who actually are using cars. And this learning can be fostered through different tools, like we have been using storytelling by developing a storytelling game when people could relate to their own situation, talk to each other about this situation, and then develop a common story in the neighborhood or the street. Why do we need an intervention there? Or drawing and using art is also another way to express and learn about each other. We have been using the rich pictures method where people can contribute to a common drawing and create an image of their street or of their neighborhood.
Jochen, please.
When you talk about the experiments, I think one thing, because Annick, you said the sort of the learning and the impact is very important. I very much agree with that, because I would say as that you need for an experiment, you somewhat need a hypothesis or a theory in one of the other forms. So you want to gain some experience or knowledge with it, and I think it's interesting to think about different scales of an experiment also, because we can sort of create also conditions where I mean, you guys did that, I think with your experiment. Of course you made a sort of you ran like a big experiment with a study group, etc. And then in that sense, but you always also created sort of an experiment for each person that they could themselves individually run through, and then gain for themselves an experience and a result in a sort of a learned experience that can be very powerful. Much more powerful than, or as an impact than producing desk research, of course. But I think it's interesting, or for us also in TU Brock, it was interesting to think about those different levels of the system where what you engage with, So like, for example, in the city, you have that whole, what in one article that I also linked was called the urban planning regime. You have like how the city's planning regime works, etc., how the people work with each other, what sort of document strategies are produced, how all the projects get managed, and etc. So how can you experiment in such a setting? How can you also open with the experiment you are doing? How can you create more sort of capacity to also then afterwards include the result in the sense of impact? So how, because when you run an experiment with a system that's very rigid, you have a result, and then afterwards your sort of the learning, it cannot sort of enter the system in the sense that it goes back and it changes the system by some new intervention, or it disrupts the system, to use that language. And I think this is very, very important to think about before you do your experiments. How can we sort of bring stakeholders together and co-create this space where then also change is possible from the results. I mean, it can happen by itself, but it's also one aspect I think that can be very effective when you go run through those experiments.
Yeah. Yeah, Annick, before I give the word to you, I do wonder, because Florian, you mentioned multiple levels, and I do wonder, in all your experiences, is it who needs to be at the table in your research projects so to create change? Is it good to have everyone on board, or is that rather a limiting factor? Just to throw that in as a general question, but please, Annick, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that was also one of the things that I would like to discuss a bit further, also in response to Florian. Because he said, yeah, how can the lessons learned feed into the system? And I think he also made the very good argument that indeed we need those stakeholders that can help us to gain impact, to create impact with the experiments. We need to involve them from the beginning of those projects and involve them in the learning community and in formulating the learning questions that they are also interested in. What helped a lot in our project is to also try and look at the timing of the experiment in relation to certain processes, like policy processes that you need for the kind of bigger impact of your experiment. So in our case, for instance, we knew that the university, which was an important stakeholder for us, was working on a revision of their mobility policies, and that our experiment could be a very useful, also for them, a useful insight into, for instance, the routines and preferences of the employees of the university that were involved in our experiment. And now the lessons learned can feed into that policy process. Of course, you don't want to be co-opted by a powerful actor in these processes. But on the other hand, if you know that there are some developments going on in terms of the people that also have decision power and policy-making power, then it can be helpful to engage with them to enhance the impacts of the experiments. And I'm curious to hear what other experiences there are with the other colleagues here.
Me too. Imre, please go ahead.
Indeed, in our project, actually, the very first task that we did was to make a stakeholder analysis. So who are the key stakeholders who are currently involved in street transformations and who should be involved in street transformation processes? And we mapped them actually according to their power and also interest. So we created this power and interest matrix to see actually that those who have the most interest in change, citizens usually have little power actually to change things. So that's why the conversations between these stakeholders, especially with those who have the power, the municipalities, the local authorities, are very important. And what is also very important that sometimes the experiments or interventions actually do not address the real needs of the local population. And if these interventions don't address actually urgent needs of the population, then there will be also resistance and a lot of conflict across and between the stakeholders. And one aspect actually, originally we built our project around consensus building. So we wanted to find a solution that all participants, all stakeholders agree with, but we had to realize during the process that consensus is rarely possible. If you are seeking consensus, then the process would last forever and no change would be possible. So maybe in many cases, compromise is actually a more feasible goal, and some partners will have to give in from their needs and demands. And sometimes conflict is actually can be also positive because it can also foster more change or further discussions around what needs to be done in the future.
That's very interesting, because I already wanted to ask now, Annick, for example, you've really talked about actively destabilizing a system, and that if you think about making changes, say there's a new bikeway, then perhaps the person biking will be thrilled about it, and another person might be not so happy about it. So I'm really curious to hear how you all have experienced resistance in your work and how you've dealt with it. And Göran, you were the next up, I think.
Right. Okay, I'll speak to that instead. So as I think it was Imre and also Florian that pointed out, the language of, if you call it destabilization or phase out or discontinuation or decline, all these concepts and terms that are used by transition scholars, none of them are very positive, and all of them are politically sensitive because they involve breaking structures, and they involve redistributing privileges, and of course there will be some that will lose out in either actually doing it or perceiving it that way. So they are difficult to discuss and very difficult to implement for elected officials. And so it is, from based on my experience, and I think that other panelists will agree, that it is much more difficult to engage with that than engaging with nurturing niches and driving innovation forward and testing new things that might bring new opportunities. And the key, of course, is that you need both. Or we could await when there is pressure on the existing car regime, and then we hope to have mature enough alternatives that could replace that by that point. But we don't have the, as Florian pointed out, we don't have that time. We cannot await that. So basically, we need to put pressure on the socio-technical regime. And today, what we discuss is the car dominance, and that is difficult, and you need to find ways of doing that that aligns with the policies and the strategies that if you for instance work with a city, what they have, if they have goals for the sustainability of the urban mobility system, or if they have goals for how they will use the land in the city. And for instance, if you discuss with or work with what I work a lot with parking, then we have a lot of car parking at the minute in most cities, and that's then you can look at the alternative use that it hinders, and you can look at what social and environmental values that could bring to the society. And then you focus, even though it's destabilization within the car regime, it will build something new in other systems. Sorry, Jacob, I will stop speaking now because I'm not sure what I'm saying anymore.
It was incredibly interesting, and point taken on that. It is not enough to wait around and hope for a crisis to give a window of opportunity, but rather the urgency is there now. I do want to ask one question that I really want to ask, because I see there's a ton of interesting questions in the chat, and we will get to them in a second. So I know all of you have projects that are coming towards an end, or Acute has already come to an end. Now that you stand at the end of that road, I wonder, is there something that you've produced that you want to highlight, or also is there something that you feel like now at the end of the project, I think this is what needs to happen next? Yeah, Florian, please.
Yeah, I think for us, we have produced several things that we are because we concluded last year in July, and we have since also won a follow-up project within the DUT project, where we specifically focus on transition conflicts, because that was one thing that we identified within the 2.5 block project that there is often diverging goals, different barriers that are so strong that you can design the best experiment. Also in the chat, somebody was asking, so how can you make sure that your experiment creates the as far enough of a change that we would need or that that would be desired? And I would say with each experiment, you can also test like sort of like the change capacity of the system you are in, or on seen differently, like the rigidity of the system you are in. And then if you have like a really tough nut to crack, then you're like, okay, we ran an experiment, but there was no change happening as a result. But this is also a result, you know, like it's you just know that you have a very rigid system. So in this sense, we have produced in Tune Our Block, we produce different ways of looking at super blocks as a transformative project, so that you look at it from a very early stage, that you really go into seeing what you want to achieve with your project, so that you go into the vision, what you call futuring, that you then do a planning, which interchanges with a first pilot, or maybe call it an experiment. And then you can use that first implementation of a project to institutionalize, ideally, super blocks in that sense as an urban strategy. But of course, you could use the same framework, I don't know, for school streets, or I don't know, and a lot of other projects that challenge the hegemony of the car, in the sense that they redistribute urban space that's in most cases still allocated to the benefit of the car system. Yeah, but I won't say more because we have also other people in the discussion.
Yeah, Imre, please.
Sorry, I just lost my button for the microphone. So what I wanted to add from the Street Forum project is that one of the key learnings was that children and young people can be the agents of change. We have been working with schools, and children actually sort of paved the way also towards parents and different people living in the community, because parents were worried about the safety and security of their children. So they were more open for interventions which actually addressed the safety and security of their children. And we also noticed that children are usually not taken seriously, although they might have very creative and original ideas. So in building upon the Street Forum project, we just started a new DUT-funded project, which is called Conifer, in which we are working with the so-called school ecosystem that includes children, parents, and teachers, to develop, to co-develop scenarios and also visions for mobility and urban space around schools, bringing in different motivational and interesting elements for children, like artificial intelligence, gamification, like computer games, and also arts and culture as using which we can use as a sort of umbrella to gather different types of activities. And we are also adopting the tools that we developed in Street Forum for use with children and young people, and see actually how storytelling works, how stakeholder personas might work with them, or how drawing rich pictures might spark their imagination.
Excellent. Any further comments? Otherwise, we have a lot of questions in the chat, so feel free to keep adding your reflections from your work. Göran, I see you've unmuted yourself.
Yes, and and it relates to many questions now, but it relates to, I will try to find it. There was a question in the chat about whether or not can use pilot project as a synonym for experiment. And I think you shouldn't, because I think that brings in or you can use that for a few experiments or some experiments, but not for all, because experiments do not have to be in project form. There are other versions of experiments. If it could be grassroots experiments, some and other forms that could allow for different things. And I think that's just reflecting back on what my colleagues have said. I think so embeddedness is key. If you have to, your experiment has to be embedded with the system that you're trying to influence, whether or not that is local to national or even further up than that, whether or not it's the learning system, or you're actually trying to, for instance, influence the structure of the urban planning regime. And I think it was Imre that spoke about involvement, and involvement, who needs to be involved, that depends on that objective and the scale, but it is key to achieve that embeddedness, and it is indeed difficult, but it is not enough, because as we have seen when we are looked, for instance, at the JPI Urban Europe project, yes, local stakeholders are involved, but they are involved in the project, but they have not been that involved in the project formulation. They are not involved in the decision making, and there are a lot of power imbalances that needs to be addressed. And what we see there too is that yes, we can see those shortcomings in the projects, but on the funding structure do not really support the involvement of the local stakeholders and the embeddedness with, for instance, local processes, because we have the rigid structure of funding should be in this way and that, the product duration should be this and that, and that you should have stakeholders from this and that many countries, and then yes, then that is the starting point. The starting point is not what is needed and who is involved in a specific city. Sorry, Jacob, that addressed at least one of the comments in the chat.
Excellent. And also your reflection from Acute. There is, Anik, I'm going to give the word to you in a second. I just want to read out 2 more questions for you all to think about. Is there a role for the arts in learning and community cohesion? And second, how, from Chris and from Diana, how can we challenge or tackle the not in my backyard mindset? And now I'm going to give it to Anik first.
Yeah, no, I'm also very interested in this question about the role of artistic methods, so to say, in these processes. And I think Imre already talked about it, but could be nice to hear a little bit more about also how that might help to create more impact for such projects. I do think that in the way we talk about experimentation, there is a lot more emphasis on the kind of the stakeholders that we need at the beginning of those processes, and a bit less, and maybe we should pay more attention to the stakeholders we need towards the end of the experiments to be able to better embed the results, right? So I think it's important that we really try to think about, if we include people in this process of experimentation, who can be included with the task and responsibility to create an impact and to kind of implement and embed the lessons learned through these experiments. Do we pay sufficient attention to that question, or do we mainly focus on who should be involved in the early stages of setting up the experiment? That's an open question that I have.
Very good questions. I'm going to just read out one more and then pass it on to Florian. Anna asks, any reflections on the organizational barriers for system change in cities, which become visible through experiments? If somebody wants to say something on that, Florian, please.
Yeah, I think this question touches, or at least I would answer it with this urban planning regime that you have in every city. And it's in every city organized in a different way. So what is the practice of understanding, maintaining, planning, building the city who is involved in which way and what norms and practices shape that. I think it's quite interesting to look at this from like take a lot of steps back and then look at this as a system, because it really helps you understand what you engage with. What I found very helpful, and actually in the course of my practice and career, what I really discovered is that it helps to take a step back and try to understand the other stakeholders. Even if you have somebody who is like super opposed to I don't know, even the idea of experimenting, then just spend some time on understanding why that is and where that person comes from. And the interesting thing is that the cities they are done by people, so that if you engage with that system, you also need to engage with people. So in that sense, you need to create a condition that touches what you said, Anik, that you create a condition where people want to embark on this experiment, But I also I wanted to add that, and also seconding what Göran, you said, not every experiment needs to be, like touching like a huge scope. It's some, because I know from experience it can be like really resource, time, and cost consuming to create experiments, and you really should spend some time before to think about what is it actually what you want to achieve. And then in some cases it might be better to make something smaller, but then that has a specific impact that can also be replicated, and you can share it well with other people than running a larger thing that's maybe then where you just don't really have the resources to follow up. I think this is something that that you really need to design well. So the experiment itself needs to be designed well. And those two questions on the artistic methods, what we at Loud have, I'm not sure if everybody would see that as artistic or have the same understanding of artistic, but for me, or in our practice, we say that the design and an artistic approach, so to engage with I don't know, something everyday-ish as a street, in the way that this actually becomes an art piece, but not an art piece in the sense that you put your ego on the art piece and say, this is my design or something like that, but that it's more that you have a creative quality in what you are doing that really helps people to engage with the process, and then maybe engage with something more dry, like planning topics, etc. But people basically get attracted from an artistic approach, and that also helps the not in my backyard thing. We always try to invite people by bringing things down to an individual level, create entry points to the content. Okay.
Super important. Imre, I'm sorry, maybe you can squeeze that into our next segment, what we're going to say, which is one last thing we really need to do, and that is to talk about do's and don'ts. So very quick points from each of you. If you are implementing a research project, an innovation project on this subject now, do you have any thoughts on this is one thing you really should do, and this is one thing that you absolutely should not do, in quick words? Maybe I'll... Göran, I think you've unmuted.
I can start if I'm not taking the word from Imre. So firstly, what I need to do is that I need to give credit to Kristina Lindqvist at Malmö University, who produced this analysis with me. But in terms of others' do's and don't, I think it's what you should do is to critically reflect on objectives and assumptions before you decide on how to whether or not to embark on an experiment, how to organize it, and what you want to achieve. And what you shouldn't do is to try to achieve everything at once.
So clear priority setting.
Yes.
Imre, please.
In terms of do's, I think what is very important, even before starting with the experiment, to understand actually what people need and what they want and what their perceptions are, so that the experiment is actually addressing the real needs of local people and local residents. And I think it's also important that participation is meaningful. So the research is embedded into ongoing activities and ongoing transformations. So not only parachuting into a neighborhood with an idea and then trying to work with people that you might not even know. And in terms of don't, we have developed a lot of tools, but we realized that individually these tools don't work. So they need to work in unison. Both digital and analog tools need to be used together, because some people don't use digital channels. Some people are not comfortable sitting down and do storytelling. So they need to be used in combination. And reflecting on the organizational barriers, also they need to be embedded into the planning practices. And for that, the planners, municipalities need to know the resources and the efforts that are required, which can be time, money, and also skills.
Excellent. Annick, please.
I think there's a lot of consensus here about it, at least the do's, because I also noted down for the do's. I think it's important that you define at the beginning with your learning community what you want to learn from your experiment. So you formulate the learning questions together with a diverse community, as diverse as possible. And the don'ts, I would say, don't forget to also include in your experimental design how the lessons learned can be transferred to new initiatives, and how and by whom. So who takes the responsibility for this?
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Florian.
Yeah, I would just say do engage with people, with your learning community, to use your word, Annick, and don't follow a closed experimental design. So you should be able to change or amend your experiment.
Right. Excellent. Thank you all so much for the participation today, and a particular thanks, of course, to our wonderful speakers. I've learned a lot in the last hour. You will, in a couple of days' time, find the recording on YouTube, and you will find a link to our YouTube channel in the chat. And I also want to encourage you to sign up to our JPI and DUT newsletters and follow us on LinkedIn to get notifications on upcoming urban lunch talks, but basically all recent updates. And finally, I want to give a special thanks to Ida Mårtensson and Katarina Schillberg, who have organized this urban lunch talk. And with that, I can just say thank you so much for joining us today and for being so active in the chat. It's been an incredibly interesting discussion. And see you at the next Urban Lunch Talk. Thank you.